World Financial Group offers entrepreneurs from all backgrounds the opportunity to start their own business on a level playing field. Dr. Yana Woodhouse, receiving the WCM Wall Street Pioneer Award by the United Black Wall Street of America, Inc., is one of those entrepreneurs.
I see WFG and TFA as a place where African Americans with an entrepreneurial mindset can flourish. And the bonus, we help families and serve the communities across the country.
To learn more about us, go to worldfinancialgroup.com.
We are the sons and daughters of the soul. We are resilient and forever forward-thinking. We ask for nothing else than the opportunity to live and to create the lives that we were meant to live. We want nothing but an equal chance at options and possibilities. The same possibilities and options to live out our potential as our fellow man. We want to be heard, understood, and expressive in our reality. We are the future. We are the creative. We are here.
This is Kia Rogers, and you're listening to Urbanology with my dad, Tony Rogers, on WHCR 90.3 FM New York.
Good afternoon. Tony Rogers here, your host for Urbanology, the Art of War. I hope all is well with you. It's, wow, it's almost August. Where did the summer go? It seems that the older you get, sometimes the faster the days and months and years go. But nevertheless, we are here, and thank goodness it's a lot going on in the world. And I'm happy today because I have an opportunity to talk about one of the institutions that have been a pillar as relates to history, not only of Harlem, but the African diaspora. And as president of the Harlem Tourism Board, I get a lot of people looking to at least come or go to the Schomburg Center for Research of the Black Culture because of all of the data that's there and all of the information that's there that if you're doing papers or movies or the like, you can usually find something that can be useful at the Schomburg Center. And my guest for today is one of the caretakers, I suppose that's the best word, of the Schomburg as we speak. And he is the deputy director of the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture. So please welcome Kevin Matthews.
Tony, how are you? It's good to be with you.
It's good to be with you as always, Kevin. As I was saying that before we were on the air, being in the Schomburg late at night or when not too many people are around, and you can kind of
Mhm.
feel the spirit that's in that building with all of the wonderful things that have taken place there. Must be a very spiritual moment and feeling that you might have.
It is. Obviously, I'm here late at night because otherwise you wouldn't say that. Yes, I'm here a lot later than I should be sometimes. Um, but I will tell you where I feel the spirit, because this happens to me all the time. Um, you likely know that some of the ashes of Langston Hughes are at the Schomburg Center, and they're in our main um, space called Langston Hughes Lobby. And there's a piece of art there called Rivers, a large piece of art. It's the entire room. And underneath the centerpiece of the artwork Rivers uh, are some of the ashes of Langston Hughes. And as I'm telling this story to people who are visiting and talking about how Langston came up with that poem, and that's all, of course, in his own writing and his papers, it's hard not to get a shiver up your spine.
Hmm.
I mean, I literally feel the spirit of Langston, and I often ask people, "Did you feel the shiver?" And they feel it too.
And for me, just walking into the Schomburg, um, it's been a part of me for so long. There's just, it's almost like when you walk into a cathedral or a place where most of the time people who come there have a certain type of positive energy, a spirit, you know. And I do believe that energy is something that can change. Positive energy can change negative energy. I guess say light can
Oh,
always overshadow the darkness. And when you're in institutions like the Schomburg, where people are coming searching for knowledge and obtaining information, it gives off a certain type of environment for those who are there for the first time, or like me, who are there often.
and you know what? I like that. It allows us to feel that they understand the importance of this place, the importance of the work, and understand the spirits that have come through. I mentioned Langston Hughes, but our namesake, Arturo Alfonso Schomburg. I mean, his history is fascinating, and people are still learning about it and still talking about it. We've been interviewed by folks and by media outlets from Puerto Rico. We're still trying to make sure that people understand that one of their own has had such an impact on Black society, on American society, on the Village of Harlem.
And it's also, I write about this often when we talk about the African diaspora. Uh, it sometimes divide and conquer is one of the major, not sometimes, all of the time, tools in keeping the masses in check. And Terrell Schomburg was a fine example of the relationship of being African, whether it's African coming from Puerto Rico, the Dominican Republic, Paris, wherever the ships landed and you developed, you know you have a center point
Yeah.
that is not often acknowledged. Even as was the whole idea of being an African American, I consider myself an African who was born in America, not
Mhm.
necessarily an African American. African American's heritage goes back to maybe 400, at best 500 years, but an African, from the beginning of time. So it's a different type of a mindset.
It's a very good point. Quite often when we're talking to people here, I think a lot of people see this as a place of African American history, and I do have to correct them. This is about the African diaspora.
Hmm.
And, as we're talking, I often tell people, okay, well, I am an African American, but more often than not, I use the term black because when I say African American, I easily see some people in the room thinking I'm not talking about them. But at least when I'm saying black, I'm including more people. I'm including the folks from the Caribbean basin. There are lots of Latinos who understand that part of their history as well. Certainly, people from the African continent understand that about their history as well. But I want them to know that Schomburg Center represents all of us, and we do our best to make sure the collection reflects the entire diaspora. It's not just African Americans. I'm not sure where you're from, Tony. I was born and raised in New York City, so I grew up in South Jamaica, Queens, but my mom's family's from South Carolina. Dad was from Alabama before moving up to Cleveland, Ohio.
Where in
But
South Carolina, Kevin?
so my mom was born in a small town called Ellery, and a lot of folks are still around Columbia and Santee.
Interesting. I was born in Lincoln Hospital in the Bronx, but when I was born, my parents were first generation from South Carolina.
Hmm.
My mother was from a little town, a smaller town probably than yours, called Williamston, South Carolina. You know, a few miles out of uh, Columbia, and my dad was in a smaller town called Belton,
Hmm.
South Carolina.
Wow, yeah.
And I lived there until I was ready to go to school. So they say the first couple of years of your life, kind of shapes how you feel. The first from 1 to about 4 or 5, I could run out the back door and run
Yeah.
up and see a lake and go fishing and sleep at night outside in the grass and chase rabbits and pick blackberries and all of that stuff. When I came to New York, it was like a culture shock.
I can imagine. Well, you know what? So Queens was, the small row houses all up and down. And when my family moved out to Queens, this was in the 1950s.
Uh-huh.
Um, they moved from Harlem.
Hmm.
Um, and there's a photo of my father and my brother when he was a toddler, and behind them are all woods, and the woods turned out to be St. Albans, Cambria Heights, and then Laurelton. Those literally each year, Queens was getting built out all the way to the Nassau County line. So we were part of those first black folks
Similar
in
to,
Queens.
and my grandparents, when I they lived on Convent Avenue, and then my father was a Pullman porter, and then moved to Jamaica, and we used to always think it was Long Island.
Yeah, yeah,
Was
no, that's right.
They were off of Supton Boulevard,
Right.
Linden Boulevard, and you're right. Um, when I was growing up, there were woods.
That's right. That's right. Well, I will tell you something as someone who grew up in a house with a yard and grew up with literally trees was still growing up when I was growing up in Queens. My fascination was with the urban setting. You'd get on the bus, you'd go to the F or the E train, and you'd go to 42nd Street. So I thought New York City was all like 42nd Street. And it wasn't
It
until
wasn't
I
such
was
a nice place to be at certain points,
I know,
especially at
I
night.
know. Well, and so I wound up going to college here in New York City, but one of my favorite things to do, especially when I wanted to get away from everybody else, I would go down to Midtown. I'd go down to Times Square and walk and be around the lights. One of my favorite things to do even today is to be up somewhere high in Harlem where I get to see the rooftops of Harlem. That's one of my favorite things to do.
You need to go to the rooftop of the Renaissance. They just
I,
opened
I
that.
haven't done that yet. Yes, okay,
That
that's the one for me.
it's it's really a place that you need to, if you like to see high parts of. You can see all of Harlem. You can see a lot. It's a nice event. But tell
So,
us a
so,
little bit
so
more
Tony,
about.
Tony, wait a minute. I'm going to mention one more to you. I'm going to
Sure.
mention another high spot that allows you to see the rooftops of Harlem. This is one I found as a college student at Columbia. So Columbia's main campus on 116th Street and
Hmm.
Broadway. But if you walk through 116th Street all the way to Morningside Drive,
Hmm.
there's a park there. And if you
Yeah.
stand where the stone bench is and you look over the rooftops of Harlem,
Right.
my favorite thing to do is to actually go up there before the sun was up because you'd see the sun up, the sunburst over Harlem. It was
Right.
actually one of the more magical things I've ever experienced.
Interesting. Yeah. I lived on Convent Avenue, so those are all of the places that I used to go, and actually went to Columbia for a semester until I got approved for the GI Bill and Sikh,
Mm.
which which allowed for me to get paid to go to school as long as I kept my grades up.
So you were in Sikh and I was in the private a college version of that. That was called HEOP, H-E-O-P, Higher
Yeah.
Education Opportunity Program. And without that, well, my wife and I were both Higher Education Opportunity Program students. Without that, we wouldn't have made it through.
So how did you find your way into the position that you are now? What was that journey path?
So it's interesting, and I do tell folks that I didn't come to Schomburg initially as a staff member. I found the Schomburg Center as a patron.
Hmm.
Um, this was I was still working at Columbia University at the time. I was running the Double Discovery Center. Those are the Upward Bound and Talent Search programs,
Yeah.
and it was a lot going on with juvenile justice, and things had clearly changed, and I didn't really understand why or how. And this was around the time that Trayvon Martin was slain.
Hmm.
And I remember watching that trial and just I couldn't understand why people could not see the injustice of having a grown man with a loaded weapon approaching a teenager and killing him, and
Hmm.
somehow he's let free. I knew something was wrong, and I'd had plenty of students who were, just wonderful kids who were getting picked up by New York City police over some foolishness, and I would do the thing I'm supposed to do. I'd go in a suit and tie, and there are times I pretended to be a pastor. There are times I pretended to be a close family friend. I would do anything I could. I'd stand up and talk to the judge just to make sure that we could go home.
Hmm.
So something was wrong, and it was a former student of mine who told me, "Well, there's a good discussion going on at the Schomburg Center," and I hadn't been to Schomburg at that point in maybe decades, and I was hooked. I was absolutely hooked. I learned so much in that one discussion. And the other thing I liked, Tony, was how the programs were run. It says it's going to begin at this time. It's probably going to end around this time. There was a Q&A and everybody was out. I loved it. It was like clockwork. So I would go back and, I obviously had a thing for the more political or historical discussions. There were some things that weren't necessarily my taste, but I tell people it was like getting a second degree and not having to pay for it. And as I was enjoying myself as a patron, I just happened to stumble on a job. And, I'm reading the job description and it sounded like me. Literally, it sounded like it was written for me. And I figured, what the heck, right? So I applied. I didn't really even expect to get an interview. I got interviewed, had a good conversation with uh, the gentleman who was then the new director. This was Kevin Young who hired me. So
Hmm.
that's one of the reasons, by the way, that I'm called KC at the Schomburg Center. KC is Kevin Christopher. One of the questions Kevin Young asked me was, okay, well, if I want to hire you, how are two Kevins going to be on the same floor with offices next to each other? And I said, I prefer KC anyway. I really do. Um, and there are times in your life where things happen for a reason. I know people think that's cliche and really don't like it,
All
but
things
it
happen for
was,
a reason.
yeah, it was obviously meant to be. And I don't take for granted every day that I'm here what an honor it is to be here and how special it is to be here. If you ask, I think virtually every single Schomburg Center staff member, well, why are you here? They will all say it's because it's the Schomburg Center.
Yeah.
What we're doing is not really the issue. It's that it's the Schomburg Center.
And it's always been a place, in my political life, big in the Panther Party. And actually, I was, I had a great deal of gratitude when you told me that you were doing a memorial for, for one of my brothers over the weekend,
Yeah, Eddie Ellis.
Eddie
Yeah.
Ellis. And, it was a place to get information,
Right.
where you can always get it.
I think
This,
I mentioned to you there's a long relationship between the Black Panther Party here in Harlem,
yeah,
um, and the Schomburg Center. So it's throughout the
education
archives.
classes and,
Yes, that's
and,
right. And we
forums
still see
and
lots of the brothers and sisters still come here. Um, Kathleen Cleaver was here. Um, she felt connected enough to Schomburg Center to do a memorial for her son when he passed, and did it here. So it's a very special relationship. I don't take that for granted either.
because it was a place for knowledge. It was a place that you can do the things that you wanted to do in a forum that it was, supportive. It
Right.
was an institution. A lot, you know, there was a lot of drama, I'm sure, with the New York Public Library as released.
Don't kid yourself. There still might be, but
But that's another story. Tell us about some of the celebrations that are coming up, and you have some new exhibits that's coming in. Tell us
yeah.
a little bit about those things.
As a matter of fact, we're opening two exhibitions this summer, which is sort of rare for us. This is not the time we would normally open exhibitions, but there is a really special event that's coming up in August. Friday, August 2nd is going to be what would have been the 100th birthday of James Baldwin. And James Baldwin's papers are here at the Schomburg Center, and he has a very special relationship with Harlem. He grew up here, he still has family members here. So we are having an exhibition about the life and times of James Baldwin. In fact, the name is very familial. It's called Jimmy, God's Black Revolutionary Mouth. Whenever we meet his relatives, they all call him Jimmy, and that's what close friends and family called him. And the term God's Black Revolutionary Mouth um, is from his eulogy. It was Amiri Baraka who used
Mhm.
that term to describe Brother Baldwin. So we're having an exhibition. There are going to be some things on view that have never been seen in the public before.
Wow.
Schomburg Center is actually really thrilled to do this. There will also be some Baldwin pieces at the main library building on 42nd Street. For those of us who grew up in New York City, we still call it the main library, but it has a name. It's the Stephen A. Schwartzman Building, SA. So we
Never
call it
called it that,
SASB,
though.
SASB. I know that. I know. It's either the 42nd Street Library or the main library. But it is SASB, Stephen A. Schwartzman Building. So there'll be things there for Baldwin. There'll be some events at all of the branches. We have 90 something locations, and there'll be a lot of things going on at the branches. But because of who Baldwin was, there are going to be international events as well. Members of his family are hosting events and actually putting on events themselves as well. So it's going to be quite a celebration.
How
And our
long will the
exhibition opens
exhibit
on the
be
9th
up?
through the start of February.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Um, the other exhibition I'll tell you about, and then I'll tell you what's coming behind that. Um, Another unique and special exhibition, and I have to tell you, they're all special. So it's hard for me to it's hard for me to say something special, but this one is really unique. It is Afro-Mexican photography. So we started talking about the diaspora
Uh huh.
and how we do reflect the entire diaspora. Well, this is a recent acquisition. It's Afro-Mexican photography. Um, it's called Visibility and Resistance, and it really is about um, the Black identity in Mexico and how there's a national movement to raise the Black identity to a higher level in Mexico. And of course, most folks don't think about that.
My goodness. Don't let Trump hear that.
Are you kidding? I want him to come. Maybe he'll learn something.
That's interesting, though. And so is it a number of different African Mexican photographers or photographers that are focusing on the concept?
These are photographers who are actually Afro-Mexican,
Hmm.
and this is their work trying to raise voices in Mexico. This is sort of a cultural explosion that's taking place in Mexico. And this is a very interesting time in the world. We've actually spoken to a number of delegates from different countries who are reckoning with the afterlives of slavery and the Atlantic slave trade in their country. Uh, Portugal, Brazil, um, the Netherlands has been here. Folks not just doing research, but also talking to us and talking with each other about the impact of the Atlantic slave trade and the afterlives of slavery. And lots of places are coming to reckon with their past. Here in the States, Tony, as we have major universities that have been reckoning with their past, dealing with slavery and the impact of having formerly enslaved people on their campus. A lot of the Ivies, I think Georgetown has gone through this as well. Um, for many of us, and I know that at the Ivy that I attended, I thought I knew when the first Black students were there and the first Black graduates were there. And as it turns out, there were people who were there that weren't credited for who they were, either because they might have been hiding it. In many cases, the universities were hiding it. And there were definitely um, enslaved people who were on campuses because they were brought there by students, and families wanted them to have their slaves with them. I mean, it's an ugly story. As we talk about the folks and the corporations and the companies that were complicit in the Atlantic slave trade. Many of our universities were as well, and that shouldn't be news to anyone.
And many, that I was uh, surfing my phone. Sometimes I do that, like young people. When I get bored, I go into and and and,
Yeah.
and they have interesting little tidbits. And one of the things that I saw, and I didn't. It was late, so I didn't write it down. I'll probably see it again. Is that they had the 10 companies that
Mm,
are currently uh, a product of their involvement with the slave trade. I mean, there were places like Aetna, the insurance company. These companies were able to use
right,
humans as collateral in many different loans, banks, even JP Morgan Chase. They,
right.
they were companies that was what was happening. And we were collateral.
We actually have some of those records here at the Schomburg Center. There was there is, I'm sorry, there is an insurance company that found records in their vault, and to their credit, and I always say to their credit, they didn't deep six them, they didn't burn them. They actually wanted to preserve them and have them studied, so they gave them to us. This was New York Life.
Mhm.
So New York Life found the records of the Nautilus Insurance Company, and the Nautilus Insurance Company was the predecessor to New York Life. So what is part of our collection are handcrafted ledgers that are huge. Tony, that some of them, they must be 6 feet by 12 feet. They're huge leather bound ledgers where the commodities that were on ship, that were insured by um, shipping companies and by future masters. You literally have the names and the ages, or approximate names and ages, of slaves who came over on the ships that were insured through Nautilus.
Mm.
And you actually had determinations of what happened to many of them, that they died, and how much was paid out. So we've only had one of the ledgers, because they're so huge. We've only had one of the ledgers open for an exhibition that we did several years ago. Um, the exhibition was really about the art of abolition, all the different ways that abolitionists, black and white, tried to dismantle the institution of slavery. But we also had a few things that showed the horrors of slavery, and one of them was, a ledger open so that you could see how this record was kept. And I give tours quite often. It's not really part of my job, but it is something that I really enjoy doing. But trying to talk to young people about what those ledgers represented was really, really difficult. And I would ask them, well, do any of you have relatives with a car? Sure, sure. Or if you own a home or an apartment, well, your folks have insurance. So formerly enslaved people were insured. And
Hmm.
if something happened to them, there was a payout.
Right.
And you could see the young minds just sort of spinning.
And there were companies that you could rent slaves.
Yeah,
If you couldn't afford slaves,
right.
you could rent slaves. I could see Richard Pryor doing some interesting comments on that, because a lot of times you use laughter to tell the truth and keep this laugh to keep from crying. But that actually
Yeah.
was. How can a person, if they want to explore different types of research, what do they need to do? Do they have to have appointments? Do they have to, what's the process of
Sure.
exploring the Schomburg?
So I always tell people that Schomburg Center is many things to many people. Um, and there are different entry points here, which is why we do so many different things, from exhibitions to public programs to programs during the daytime. film festivals, there's music, and then of course there's research. There are people who are here every single day researching a subject matter that is their love, and they're not necessarily planning on writing a book. I know some of them talk about it, they may never actually write that book, but this is the way that they spend time, and that is learning about things that they really, really love. So we have 5 research divisions, and each research division has its own reading room, has its own storage. So lots of our collection, the overwhelming majority of the collection is here. It's not all here. So there, we encourage people to make an appointment. I also encourage people who are thinking about what they might want to learn about to come to our research and reference division. Research and reference is the walk-in space at Schomburg. This is the first place we recommend that people go and talk to our librarians about what you have an interest in, because they begin telling you, oh, well, it's in this division, that division, this division. This is how you can look it up. Let's help you make an appointment at manuscripts, archives, and rare books, or at photographs and prints. There's moving image and recorded sound. There's art and artifacts. And then, of course, the research and reference division. So appointments help because if you put it this way, if you want to see the something in the James Baldwin collection, or if you want to see um, something from Maya Angelou, those materials might be promised to somebody on that day. So rather than having you come and not have access to what it is that you want, the appointment makes sure that you have a date and a time, and those materials are yours for the entire day. You can book them sometimes for the entire week. We want people to have the time to stretch out if they want to.
What's There are a lot of people who are listening from out of the city and actually out of the country. What's the number? And give us the address of the Schomburg and the website if there's one.
Sure. Well, Schomburg Center's website is easy one. It is our name, schomburgcenter.org. Type in schomburgcenter.org and you can actually see our offerings, see something about the exhibitions. You can go to the research tab and see something about each of the research divisions. There's also something called Digital Schomburg, where people can actually log in and look at some of the recent programs that we've had. So we've been, long before the pandemic, we've been recording and live streaming and digitizing our programs. So people can look at years of programs. The link might be on site, but people can go to YouTube and type in Schomburg Center and programs will pop up. They can also go to where we were streaming our activities before. So if they go to what had been live stream, it's called Vimeo now. Vimeo purchased live stream. Uh, and Vimeo has a long catalog of what's available that had Schomburg Center's presentations, largely our public programs. One of our divisions is called the Lapidus Center. It's named after 2 benefactors, Sid and Ruth Lapidus. And the Lapidus Center is for the historical analysis of transatlantic slavery. And one can see their programs, one can look at parts of that collection as well as our other 5 divisions. So there are many entry points, Tony. And I tell people that there's also nothing wrong with doing what I did. I came as an adult, I put myself on the mailing list, and when there were discussions that were going to be of interest to me about a book, about learning about the history of the Young Lords, the last book that Stephen Shames came out with about the women of the Black Panther Party. So you can tell the kinds of things that I go to. There's always something for people to do and enjoy. And the exhibitions is another way for folks to actually learn things. I do, as we're thinking about Schomburg Center's history, I want people to know that it was part of our roots. The idea of adult education began at the Schomburg Center. There weren't necessarily a whole lot of places for adults to learn things. Remember that when Schomburg Center started in 1925, and when the community here in Harlem was actually asking the librarians here to help them learn more about their culture and learn more about people of African descent. And that's actually how we started. It was the community that raised their voices and wanted us to have more information here at what was then the 135th Street Branch Library. Remember, we're not talking about a very literate time in American history and anybody's history, and certainly not for folks who are coming up from the South and from some of the Caribbean islands and from the African continent. So, how did they actually use what we had at the Schomburg Center? There were exhibitions, there were book readings, and there were programs where people could learn together. Not everybody could crack a book, not everybody had time for that, but they had different ways of learning, and we still do that today. And we talk about the start of Black studies. Black studies began in Black archives. I hope you don't mind me digging a little too far in Schomburg's past. But while I've got you thinking about Schomburg's past, I'll mention something else that's coming up. We are getting ready to celebrate dual centennials. So in 2025, we're going to celebrate 100 years of our being designated as the division, originally as being designated the Division of Negro Literature, History, and Prints at the New York Public Library. That was when librarians had beseeched folks to put more resources here for the community, and the 135th Street branch of the New York Public Library became the Division of Negro Literature, History, and Prints. That was the place where the first Black librarians, the first Spanish-speaking librarians in New York City, began at our library. And then in 2026, we're going to celebrate the acquisition of Arturo Schomburg's personal collection, his 10,000 item collection. Um, and it was, in fact, the New York Urban League. I always love to tell the story. People don't understand, the connection between Harlem, the New York Urban League, and the Schomburg Center. It was the New York Urban League that was able to convince the Carnegie Corporation to purchase Arturo Schomburg's collection and to
Wow.
put it here in Harlem at the 135th Street branch. This was Arturo's wish. He wanted it to be accessible to the public, and the National Urban League had a very big hand in it.
What was the date of that?
That was, I believe, in May of 1926.
Wow.
And in our during our centennial celebrations, we're going to mark both of those occasions, and there will be brand new exhibitions up for 2025 and 2026, marking Schomburg's history, but then also what Arturo Schomburg's collection and the people who he was around. Arturo Schomburg and the 135th Street branch were hubs during the Harlem Renaissance. And
Hmm.
we talk about all the activity that was going on in Harlem, and why did it develop in Harlem? In part because, yes, this was the cultural mecca of Black folks who were coming up to New York City, but they found each other and they were able to actually study and come together and study. Believe it or not, before the collection came to the library, it was in Arturo's place. Part of his original seed collection has things that were signed and autographed to him
Mhm.
personally, to my dear friend A.A. Schomburg from County Cullen. It was actually a very amazing time. There's a project that's also taking place now. Fisk University is engaged in a program with Schomburg Center and a few other folks. I should know all the other folks. Please forgive me.
Mhm.
But when Arturo Schomburg first received money for the acquisition, he traveled to Europe, spent some money, and came back and added to the collection.
Hmm.
And then he was invited by Fisk University to come to Fisk and create a library like he created in Harlem.
It's interesting. I was just looking at a young lady who said that she went to the Met's Harlem Renaissance exhibit and encountered many of the artists worked on display at the Schomburg. So it's interesting how a lot of this is beginning to come about at this time.
Yes.
Uh,
And as an archive, we loan things for lots of these special exhibitions, whether it's to the Met, to MoMA. When folks want to do something and show off Black art and Black culture, quite often there's going to be a loan request that comes to the Schomburg Center, and we're happy to share it. Yes, we want them back, but we're happy to share what we have.
and also for families, I suppose, as they start to
Mm.
have collectibles that they want to put somewhere where they can uh, continue to tell the story. I'm sure that you've received a lot of requests to have this painting or this object to be part of a collection because of its history. And it's just a wonderful place, as we talk.
Yeah.
I'm saying to myself, wow, I gotta, I had to go back and explore. When I was in school, I was always in the research rooms, and I haven't done that in a long time. And it's not. It's just like if you go to the Met, you can't just go one time.
Right. Right.
Because everything there has so much of a story behind it.
That
And
was
if
one of James Baldwin's comments, that he always went to the 135th Street branch, and he said he read every book in the place. So Sonia Sanchez is another one. She tells a beautiful story about how the librarian at the time, Jean Blackwell Hudson, sat her down and sat her in front of black literature because Sonia made a crack about someone was telling her, well, that building, that's the building that holds black history and culture. And young smart mouth Sonia Sanchez said, well, there must not be anything in the building. And she repeated that to Jean Blackwell Hudson, who said, sat her down and gave her books to read. And Sonia said that's what started her on her literary career. That story's on YouTube. She tells it beautifully.
and
Um,
it's so much, it is so much there. I know that again, it's a place where so many different types. Been to jazz concerts in the Schomburg. Uh, People coming from uh, other parts of Jamaica
mhm.
and the Caribbean uh, coming to do presentations. So tell us, there's a centennial we
Yeah,
talked
so
about.
our centennial is from 2025 through 2026, and there's one each year. 25 and 26 are both important dates in the history of the Schomburg Center, and we want to be able to tell the story about Schomburg Center. I used the comment earlier that we are many things to many people. We are a library and an archive first. We're not a museum, although some folks think we are. We're not a cultural center, but some folks think we are. We'll take all of that. But above all else, we're an archive. Without this collection, without the archive, we wouldn't be here. The programs wouldn't be the same. Um, the exhibitions wouldn't be the same. It is the strength of this archive, and we want people to know what is here and the diversity of what is here. We also want people to understand the genius of Arturo Schomburg, but we also want to make sure that people understand the ingenuity of the librarians who actually made this place tick. That's we talk about Arturo Schomburg a lot because we want people to know who our namesake is. But Arturo didn't do it by himself. A lot of spectacular work was being done by librarians, not just black librarians. Initially, it was the white librarians who wanted to make sure that there were things here for the community. And then it was black librarianship. When we talk about that as a field, the black archive, black print culture, a lot of it began here at Schomburg Center. And I don't think anybody really disputes that. And we want people to understand that. But when I talk to the people visiting, I tell them that Black history and culture is not over, right? We're not a mausoleum, we're an archive. The archive is a living thing. It is growing. Every time somebody hits our stage, the archive grows. Every time there's an exhibition that's done by our teenagers, I'll tell you about the recent one they did at some point. Um, the archive grows, and that's what we want them to know. It doesn't end. It's continuing.
It's every day is a new beginning, as they say, right?
Very true.
Especially now that we might have the first uh, president of color, female. That's an interesting a thought pattern. There's so many different things, as you had mentioned, that seem to be happening with the diaspora. You
Mm,
know, different countries. I done a lot of work in Africa and working on a project, whether it's a film, a documentary, talking about the diaspora, the awakening of the
Hmm.
sleeping diaspora, because there's so many countries, young leaders in Africa who are beginning to say, hey, let's begin to
Hmm.
close these ranks. And even more frightening to some who are in power, talking about merging the resources of Africa to create one single note, which is what killed Gaddafi, obviously. But
There was a recent blog was written here at the Schomburg Center by a colleague of mine, Lisa Herndon. Lisa's a Harlem native, by the way. Still
uh,
lives here. She grew up here, went to school here. Lisa wrote a blog about the first woman to lead the Schomburg Center. This is Jean Blackwell Hudson. She was one of the
Jean
first.
Blackwell Hudson, yeah.
Yeah, she was one of the first women of color to graduate from Barnard College. She was a
Mhm.
classmate of Zora Neale Hurston's. So Lisa's blog is about Jean Blackwell Hudson's year off to travel in Ghana. She was
Hmm.
invited to go to Ghana to work in their library by Kwame Nkrumah.
Hmm.
And Lisa learned lots about the trip from reading Jean's own journal about her trip. And one of the things that you read in her blog was that Kwame Nkrumah really was trying to push for African state unity. He was thinking of, to put it in American terms, of the United States among African nations.
Hmm.
And not everybody wanted to see that. And he was, of course,
Obviously,
forced out of power. Yeah, yeah, yeah. But you're talking about exactly that same idea all these years later. And imagine what that would be. No one says countries have to give up their independence, but if they actually, work together and shared resources, imagine what that would do.
and and provided support for the diaspora,
Right.
because again, Africa is one. Well, most of the European, the euro, the dollar is fiat money, and it's not backed on any real resources, which is why there's always this attempt to keep us divided
Right.
and keep Africans divided. But the bottom line is, the fear is that if that, as I had said at the beginning, I think that in the master plan, we were all placed in certain positions for a reason. you
I,
know?
I agree. I agree. It wasn't until we spoke recently that I understood that you were a former Panther. And I know
Yeah,
they don't want to use the term former. I'm mistaken.
yeah,
Black Panther alumnus.
yeah.
Yeah.
Myself, Jamal. Just a matter of fact, I think you have Panther Baby in there.
I do. Panther babies here in the office.
I
I have a
forget
couple
which
of.
page it is, but Jamal writes about when he first came out of prison. Jamal had uh, done a lot of wonderful things in prison as far as his education,
Hmm.
writing plays and getting his degrees and all of that, but couldn't find a job, obviously, just like he,
Yeah.
Bobby. So we were at 22 West, and he says, I have my first child coming, and I can't find a job. And at that same time, it was the Uptown Chamber of Commerce. Toro was just
Hmm.
coming into Harlem. They were on the east side, and they were looking for a director and to deal with youth. And I said, Jamal, you should, really interview, because they wanted to connect with black youth,
Hmm.
youth of color. He says, now every time I do that, there's a problem. But after further encouragement, and I said, they're members of the chamber. He went, and so happened, and I can't remember the person's name that he interviewed, who was the head of Toro at that time. But that person had a book, Soul on Ice. He says,
Oh, yes. Yes.
this is one of my
Yeah.
favorite books. Jamal, the long story short, he got the job and did so well that he was recruited for Columbia after a period of time, and
Yeah.
was the vice chair of the senior film and video, I believe, program at Columbia, and developed, he and Vosa Impact and so many other
Right.
things. But
No, he's an amazing person. I remember
It-
him telling the story about, I think it was the first play that he wrote, and he wrote it in prison. And
yeah,
he was telling folks, if you think it's difficult trying to sell your play on the outside, it's really difficult trying to sell it on the inside. There were a group of prisoners who decided, well, we want to dramatize what prison life is like, so we want you to write it. And, you know, it's kind of a lot of pressure.
it's again, the Harlem has always been a magical place
Yeah,
of and it is just beginning to see the second Harlem Renaissance come about. But being able to have a resource like, which is the question, and I don't want to lose that because I got off into something else. Has there been a thought of digitizing, or there's so much stuff you do with social media now to make sure that the historic information is put in a place where whether it's act of God or whether it's just time to preserve those things? Is that something that has been thought about or is happening?
right. So, before the pandemic, there was a really robust discussion about digitization, and there were clearly folks who thought this is the wave of the future. In fact, that future had already come and passed, and places like public libraries were a little behind the game in terms of digitization. And then the pandemic hits, and everyone realizes, okay, we have to be able to make our collection accessible, which means they need to be digitized. People have to have access to research material and access to books. So I would say it's happening more now than it did before. And it isn't just about preservation and stewardship, Tony. Those are the kinds of things digitization would do, but it's also about making it accessible.
Mm-hmm.
If I live in California or in Ghana and I want to research something, I can begin by doing it digitally. I can begin by doing it online. So I was telling somebody recently that New York Public Library's favorite saying these days, internally, we don't usually share this, so I'll give you a scoop on this one, is that we're running two libraries with one budget because it all used to be in person, but now it's digital as well. The things we started doing during the pandemic, we can't stop. We'll never be able to stop. So this mass digitization, we are digitizing things, sending them to patrons. Again, it does depend on if we have permission to digitize. You don't have permission to digitize everything. Not everything can be shared
Right.
digitally. We haven't exactly perfected yet the digital studio where someone can look at something that we are sending them, a movie or a documentary or a clip, because we need to make sure that it's not going to be videotaped and then taken. So there are some provisions that still have to be worked out, but that's the future. It is about preservation and stewardship, but also making it accessible.
And we have a little bit more time. There's so many things, Casey. I think at some point I have to invite you back on because there were so many notes that I had that I didn't ask about as far as the different types of collections, the different types of things people might be able to see. And then you have a wonderful gift shop where there's so many different types of things that people might be able to, especially if you're coming into New York, if you're coming into Harlem, especially around Harlem Week, because we are on 135th Street for better or for worse, Works Library and other things, because of
That's right.
the activity there. But you
So
know,
our shop manager sold me my first Schomburg Center um, society membership. This was before I joined the staff. I was doing holiday shopping and I wanted things that were black themed and I couldn't find them. I said, well, let me go to Schomburg shop. And of course I found them. And she said, but you get a discount if you're a Schomburg Society member. So that was my first discount. And now we're on the same team together.
well, again, I I can't. There are no words to express the the gratitude over the years of maintaining this culture, this information that is extremely important. Matter of fact, you reminded me because I did a paper when I was at City about slavery and the
Mm,
transatlantic slave trade, and I was able to go into the Schomburg and see things that really were upsetting,
Yeah.
because I have to let you know that there's some stuff there as to just how we were perceived, uh, whether we were loaned out or we were auctioned off or we were insured, or I mean, as I said before, uh, so I understand. Not that I agree, but I understand some of the fears or issues that white people might have, because uh, I could see them saying, if I was you, what would I do with me? Or how would I feel about me? Or what I represent? And to the credit, I think, of the Africans who are here, we have handled that in an interesting way, without uh, the type of reaction I think that probably would have happened if it was verse.
I think it's part of the dignity of our culture. We were
Yeah.
always raised that we are not going to become that which hated us. We're not going to become that. We are not going to get swallowed by that same hate and violence. We are going to be different. I know I was raised that way. I'm not saying I
Well,
always lived it, but I
that's
certainly
southern,
understood it.
that southern
Yeah.
hospitality.
Yeah.
Even though I don't want to go too far back because you know what that was about, but but one thing it
Well, and as a New
allowed
Yorker,
for
you
us,
have to deal with it a little bit differently. So, you're raised with Southern hospitality, but you got a New York edge to it.
and I remember friends coming when I was small, and we used to speak to everybody. So it was
Yeah.
strange.
Yeah.
My mother said, "You can't speak to that. You don't. Do you know him? Why are you saying hello?" I said, "I don't know. That's how we would do it."
That's very much a Southern thing. Yes. Yeah, very much so.
Well, Kevin,
Are we about time?
we're about time. I want to give you a couple more minutes. Is there any is things that numbers or something that you would like people to hear about in the next 2 or 3 minutes? Please take this time and express what your thoughts are.
Well, I encourage people to go to schomburgcenter.org, but more importantly, we are at 135th Street and Malcolm X Boulevard. Get on a train, on a bus, contact Uber, and come up and visit us. Come up and see the place. The last thing I'm going to say to you is, when we talk about who valued us and who valued our history. One of the reasons Arturo Schomburg was able to amass the collection that he did, he wasn't a wealthy man, he was a workaday fellow. Um, but no one else valued our history. He saw that our history was important, and he put every little bit of extra money that he had into getting this collection. Things that he purchased, first editions in different languages, we wouldn't be able to purchase those things now. We would be outbid by universities and private collectors. But he amassed what became the seed collection because he understood the value. I want people to understand the value today.
A tremendous value, and you can get the hours, and actually you can make donations. All of that at the SchomburgCenter.org. Is that correct? Is there a
Absolutely.
number that you
Kind of
can
you.
give us for people who may be a little older and not too used to going online?
Sure. The phone number is Ask NYPL. So it's 1-917 NYPL. That, in fact, we do it so that people can remember the number. So it's 1-917 Ask ASK NYPL, New York Public Library, and you can ask all the questions one wants about the Schomburg Center.
Or you can Google it, go on Instagram, go on Facebook, or
That's right. Find us on social media.
all of
That's
those
right.
things. Well, Kevin, thank you. As I said before, though, we probably need to do another because we're all out of time now, and I haven't covered half of the things that I wanted to talk about with you. So at some point, maybe we can do this again. But for those who are listening, uh, if you have not, or if you have not in a while, take some time and go to the Schomburg. It's a wonderful experience, and Kevin, thank you so much for taking time to give us a little bit. You've encouraged me. I have to do some because you brought back some old memories as it relates to the things when I was in high school and in college and all of those things to kind of revisit. So I'm inspired. So thank you, Kevin, for that.
Thank you for the invitation. It was a pleasure talking with you. I'll see you soon, buddy.
Yeah, real soon.
Yeah, yeah.
You take care, my
That's
friend.
right. Take care of yourself.
Take care. And that was Kevin Casey Matthews. And next week, there's a surprise. We're going to do some special. There's a special show that will focus on the Apollo. And as many of you might have heard, the Apollo will be the first organization to receive the Kennedy Award. And you might want to tune into that. And of course, we're starting Harlem Week, which starts on actually August the 3rd and goes to August the 18th. So we'll be giving updates. You can also go to goharlem.org or harlemweek.com to find schedules. The Harlem Community News this Thursday will have the schedule in it. So we're in that time. So there are a lot of things that are going on, and hopefully you will be with us to help celebrate the 50th anniversary of Harlem Day, which is August. It's always the third Sunday in August. So this year will be August the 18th. So take care. I'd like, again, as always, to thank Matt McCoy and the Soul City team for providing the platform in order to talk and bring information to you. So Tony Rogers signing off, and God willing, we'll see you next week. Bye.
This is Kia Rogers, and you're listening to Urbanology with my dad, Tony Rogers, on WHCR 90.3 FM New York.
World Financial Group offers entrepreneurs from all backgrounds the opportunity to start their own business on a level playing field. Dr. Yana Woodhouse, receiving the WCM Wall Street Pioneer Award by the United Black Wall Street of America, Inc., is one of those entrepreneurs.
I see WFG and TFA as a place where African Americans
This is Kia Rogers, and you're listening to Urbanology with my dad, Tony Rogers, on WHCR 90.3 FM New York.
Urbanology. Yeah. The